Welcome into the Illini Inquirer podcast. It's Jeremy Werner and Joey Wagner talking some more Illinois football training camp as we got to see a little bit more of Illinois practice. Not a ton of passing action, but we got to see two open hours as BTN was at practice on Thursday. So we got to watch them basically go through a glorified walkthrough. No passing was seen in team drills, but a lot of kind of fire and fit kind of stuff. But Joey, we did get to see a little bit more of the personnel. And I think it's gotten to the point where why not? Let's talk about the most interesting or intriguing players of training camp. And the beautiful thing about this topic for this podcast is we can kind of go wherever we want. Probably won't talk a lot about Luke Altmaier or some of the known starters like Pat Bryant,
Seth Coleman.
Yeah, but I think this gives us an opportunity to maybe talk about some players that just for us are like, these guys could make an interesting impact on the season. So I'm interested to go through this exercise with you, man.
Yeah, I'm excited to do it. You want to do like 3 offense, 3 defense, or 2 and 2, I guess?
I just have a list. I have a list of like 10, 11 guys that we can go like.
All right, let's roll.
I'm going to fire one out. You're going to fire one out. I'll let you go first here. And this is the fun thing. Like this could be a guy who's fighting for a 3 deep spot. This could be a guy who's in the rotation, or it could be one of the stars of the team. So I'll let you lead it off.
Yeah, I mean, I know we talked about not doing established starters. And I think my caveat is going to be there's going to be a rotation there in some capacity. But I'm going to say Kaden Fagan because what we saw last year, like that, I think this hype train is moving at a pretty good pace right now. Admittedly, last night at the practice, we didn't see a ton of him. I don't know that we needed to see a ton of him do fire and fit, right? But what he did last season, and just really, if you zoom out, it was still a pretty small sample size, right? There was 3 games that he started in kind of that back middle of the year, and you're like, whoa, this kid could be something. Obviously, the 74 consecutive runs without being tackled for a loss, like that's something, right? That's a big deal. I think what intrigues me about him, Jeremy, is this is the time for the star turn. Like we saw this breakout freshman, this guy who looked like he could be Bielema's next big, give him the ball and let him kind of carry this team and pace this team. Kind of similar, admittedly, to what we saw from Josh McCray in 2021. So there is that health element, staying on the field, being available. But everything we saw from Fagan, everything we've heard from him throughout the course of the summer, I know you've written it. Tank Wright submitted him for the Freak List, Bruce Feldman's annual, hey, these guys are different list. There's just a lot there that is really interesting about him, his size, his speed, I think probably more comfort. I'm interested to talk to him during fall camp. But man, he's at the top of my list because I think he can be something really big for Illinois.
So we didn't talk about this yet, but I'm writing this morning my 5 breakout stars for this team. And, when everybody thinks of breakouts, they think of, who can come from like obscurity to all of a sudden a big role. Like Aiden Lawfrey could be like a quote unquote breakout. But for me, it's about who can break out into being an all Big Ten caliber player. And Kaden Fagan topped my list for that because one, I think he's one of the most talented players on the team. I just physically, size, speed, athleticism, explosiveness, power. He's one of the most talented players on this team. And 2, we saw it last year in a small sample size. He's a very good Big Ten football player, and he was their best running back last year. Reggie Love ended up with the most yards. And if Reggie didn't get hurt, maybe he would have been around 800, 900 yards rushing. But if Kaden Fagan would have stayed healthy through the final games, I think they would have gotten to a bowl game. I think he would have been in the conversation, at least with Dylan Thieneman, as Big Ten Freshman of the Year. And I just think he's one of the most talented players. I think he needs 200-plus touches. And if he does that, Joey, and stays healthy, which is the biggest thing for him, right? Had an injury his senior year of high school, had an injury last year, not connected to each other. But if he stays healthy, which is always tough for running backs, and he gets 200-plus touches, this is a 1,000-yard running back. Like this is one of the guys on offense I think could be an all Big Ten player. And I just think if he's good, this offense can be very good because when he was in last year, as you said, he moved the ball. Like you stayed ahead of the chains, and that made Luke Altmaier's job so much easier, made the passing game so much easier, made Barry Lunny Jr.'s job very easy because you weren't facing 2nd and 12, which I thought you did too often when Reggie Love and Josh McCray were in the game. And sometimes that was the offensive line, but Kaden can kind of overcome some of those things just to give you a yard or two, as opposed to a -2 yard rush. So those things are so important. I thought the offense was far better when he was in the game. So I think he's one of the most important players on this team. So I'm with you. I don't know if I have to learn a lot about him. I just need him to stay healthy. Like that's the biggest thing through training camp. And he's looked good in his return so far. And as you said, I think it's going to be a 3-back rotation with him, Josh McCray, and Aiden Lawfrey. But this is the guy that needs to get the most carries and touches.
Yeah, he does. And I'm trying to think back to, I'm pulling up the schedule from last year, like kind of the when did you know moment with him. Obviously, like the Minnesota, that catch and run was one, but I can't remember which home game it was. It's not Nebraska. I want to say maybe Wisconsin. He had that. It was a very short touchdown run. It was just kind of a stretch play, and he hit the Jets at maybe 10, 12 yards. I'm trying to find that now. It was a 12-yard run. Yeah, 12-yard third quarter run against Wisconsin. You're like, oh, you're big, but you can also, like, you've got burst. And that's when you kind of realize, like, yeah, he's going to get the ball a lot. And I think Illinois is going to use him quite a bit this season to balance their offense more, to not be so pass happy.
Yeah, it's not just a big plotter, right? Like, I'm not trying to say Josh McCray is just that, because I do think he's a versatile receiver, but he just doesn't have that burst. We know Kaden Fagan has that kind of burst where he can run by somebody. He ran by Minnesota's secondary, which was a pretty good secondary last year. All right, my first name I'm going to throw out there. I'll throw out another star. Let's keep the stars out here, just because he makes such a big difference on that offense, and he's kind of working his way in, figuring things out, figuring out his teammates. But Zakari Franklin, he's a really good player. He's different than anything else they have at receiver that's proven. Like Pat Bryant and Malik Elsie are big, physical. Kenari Wilcher, fast. Hank Beatty, really quick, right? Mario Sanders has that too. Alex Kapka-Jones, really long. Ashton Holland's really long. Zakari Franklin's kind of the in-between guy, but they need that guy. Just this fluid, savvy, gets open, but also has some size to him. Like, he's a little bit bigger than I thought he'd be, Joey. He's like 6'1", 190 right now, and he's just really quick in and out of his breaks. So right now, we saw him. He was like working with a third-string group. He wasn't in the first group. It was Malik Elsie with the starters, which was Kenari Wilcher and Pat Bryant, but that's not going to last. Zakari Franklin will be a starter on this team, and you can see him and Luke Altmaier. Like, I saw some, conversations they were having, just some back and forth they had, like them living together for 2 weeks as Luke like kind of let out his apartment, a single apartment, and then Zakari took over it after Luke's lease was done. But they lived together for 2 weeks, and I think that's important just to get to kind of know these guys. And they're going to have to develop a rapport on the field. But you could tell Luke's excited, and Brett Bielema sounds pretty excited about Zakari Franklin too.
Yeah, the excitement with him is starting to build up a little more. It was a little bit more tempered early when he got here, late summer. Coaches were on the road or out on vacation, and you weren't really there. And there's very little ball, right? It's all, hey, Luke is thrown to Zakari and Pat in the indoor, and here's what gets relayed back, stuff they've done. But it's starting to pick up. And, yeah, he's not going to be a second or third string receiver. I would expect even – that's how camp usually goes, right? After they give a week with some of the returners, and then by week 2, 10 days in, they start to move those guys, the top guys to the top. But he is different, and he's what I think we talked about a lot, but we shouldn't overlook still is just knowing this offense and understanding not only the play calls. Like that's pretty. I mean, these are college football players; they're smart guys. Like you can pick all of that up in really no time at all if you really want to. It's just understanding Barry Lunney. I think more than the playbook, more than understanding what's changed maybe from UTSA to Illinois in terms of what they call things, or how, just knowing what he wants to do, knowing how he wants to attack defenses. And Barry Lunney knows Zakari and knows how Zakari can attack defenses and kind of how he thinks and what works for his strengths. Like that, to me, is the part that I don't want to gloss over just because it's like, oh, well, he can learn this playbook in a day and a half. That's great. Learning each other, understanding that's a huge deal.
All right, I'm gonna go again because I want to throw somebody out there who is really important for the season. You and I were talking about it at practice yesterday because the Illinois is betting big on this guy at a big position of that's question mark. It's Alex Bray. And I got to see him a little bit at practice the other day. They had 3-on-3, kind of an inside zone kind of drill where you actually got to see the pads pop a little bit. They're just in shells last night was just helmets and shoulder pads, but you got to see these guys get a little physical. And Alex Bray is feisty, really feisty. But I think ideally, in my mind, Alex Bray is a sophomore who played a couple snaps as a freshman. You'd love for that guy to be the rotation guy, right? Kind of be that fourth guy in the defensive line, and you have another veteran there. But we know the recruiting didn't go well in 2020 and 21, 22 for the defensive line. They've added some transfers, but they also really just love Alex Bray. But he's at 270 pounds now. I'd love him closer to 280. I think that's better for the Big Ten. But he is feisty. He's strong for his size, and he's really quick. But he's a starter. It is Dennis Briggs, T-Raw Edwards, and Alex Bray. And I just think he's one of the guys I'm most interested in the season because they are putting him in that starting role and asking a lot out of him. And I believe in the kid. I believe in what he will become. Will he be that right away is my big question. But randomly, Joey, I talked to Kerry Davis, who is the new analyst for Illinois Football Radio along with Kevin Mitchell. And Kerry coached against Alex Bray, competed against him in high school. And I just want to throw this out. He said he was one of the most interesting guys he's interested to see and excited to see this offseason because he went up against him in high school. He said he does not freaking stop. I'm excited to see him play at the collegiate level because playing against him, coaching against him, it was a nightmare. It was a tough task. And I was so happy when he decided to come into Illinois. And that young man has a motor. He just does not stop. He gets after the quarterback, does a real good job in the run game, taking on blocks and shedding blocks. So I'm excited to see him just because I have familiarity with him. So that's Kerry Davis, who knows football, coached against him in high school. And I think he was a good eval, but he's got to be it this year.
Yeah, it's a big bet. And it reminds me, and we'll see if it plays out in the same way that it did a year ago, but it reminds me of betting on your corners last year. Now, you bet on probably more than one position in the secondary last year, especially with depth, and then injuries didn't help. But you're relying on a younger, inexperienced guy, a guy who, as you mentioned, he's long, like there's all those things, but he's still like doesn't really have that defensive lineman belly that you would like to see. You and I kind of noticed that last night. So obviously he needs to add weight. I don't know that anyone would tell you differently. Like that's still part of his continued development. But they need him to be good this year. And the reviews have been really good from him. Terrence Jamison is all about it. Some of the defensive linemen we've talked to, and some of that, they're probably trying to pump that confidence up, keep him going. But as you mentioned, kind of a mean dude. I mean, he was getting a little feisty in those, not like starting fights. That's not what we're saying. But I kind of got the sense that he let people know he was in those drills and he wasn't just going to fold for being a sophomore. But yeah, they do. And really, if you think about it, I'm trying to go back through. Like obviously, they tried to add Anthony Johnson, right, and that didn't work. But they've replaced him, right? Like I don't feel like they ever really went in betting on anyone other than Alex Bray. Like they tried to add these guys. They fell Johnson and then Clay Patterson fell through, but then you added Gentle Hunt or Dennis Briggs. So you're continuing. Like you're kind of one for one, but Bray felt like the guy that they believed in the whole way through, unless I'm misremembering that, Jeremy.
Well, and I think Bray was always going to be a big part of this, but I think they added Anthony Johnson in part in case Bray wasn't ready. But the word is, and I believe this, that Alex Bray was above Anthony Johnson in that rotation, which is why Anthony Johnson said, if I'm not starting, I'm going to go somewhere else to see if I can start. I still think I'd like Anthony Johnson in that mix. And General Hunt's more of a nose tackle, going to play between the guards. So I don't think that's a one-for-one change. I think it's more, it's going to be on Ezekiel Holmes to kind of be that backup option. Jeremiah Warren, do one of the freshmen like Angelo McCollum or Demetrius John step up. So that's a question mark because I just don't know who that guy is exactly behind him. Maybe it's just Ezekiel Holmes, but they're betting big on Alex Bray, and I believe in the kid. I'm not trying to, but he's just one of the most interesting guys because they are betting big on him. So who you got, Joey?
Can we stay with feisty trenches, guys? Can we go Josh Gesky?
No.
He's a guy who they bring in Kevin Wigginton, and my brain was like, it's a new left guard. I thought, he's the guy who started in the Big Ten. In my opinion, they brought him in here, and I thought he was going to slot right in. I think it's been more of an adjustment period with Kevin Wigginton. And I also think Josh Gesky has just taken the darn thing. Like, I think he's just not relinquished this left guard spot. He's got a little fire to him too. If you watch him in some of the practices, he's he'll push back a little bit. He's a big guy. Like, I sometimes forget how big Josh Gesky is.
He's 6'5", 325 is your guard. And this is one thing I've noticed about this offensive line. Like, it is big. The second string offensive line is massive, which, as you know, Joe, like, the interior has not been big. Now, Josh Kreutz is a little undersized. We know that. That's part of his story. But, like, Josh Gesky and Zai Chrysler are massive guards. So I think the run game in between the guards is going to get a lot better. But to pick up your point on Josh Gesky, like, here's the deal with the offensive line and DBs. There were a lot of first-time starters last year, and we forget about that with the offensive line a little bit because Adams and Pearl were back. But Kreutz should be better, right? Zai Chrysler going into his senior year should get better, especially at his position. He was a really good guard last year. But Gesky, that was his first season, and there were some ups and downs, but I thought he ended the year really well, especially as a run blocker. And you're right, he's got some FU attitude to him, and that's what Bart Miller wants, especially in those guards. Like, I think he's going to be a really good run blocker.
Yeah, I think that's his strength is run blocking. And there was a drill last night that I was watching, and I truthfully can't remember where. I think it was a walk-on, was struggling to understand what was expected of them in terms of what they needed to do to set the offensive lineman up. And Gasky, who I've always known as kind of a quieter, seems like a very nice dude, right? When we talk to him, and he goes, get out.
Except he's from Mantino.
Yeah, you're not gonna.
It's a Piatone guy.
Hey, home of the best Wendy's in the state of Illinois. He pushed him out of there and went in. I kind of like that leadership, not just kind of sitting by waiting for like a Kreutz or a Chrysler to go in or Bart Miller to correct it. He kind of moved that guy out of there, taught him, and like he understood there's an urgency to this, right? You got to keep this going. There's only a finite amount of time. So I just wonder, in terms of being intriguing, like what's his next step? How does he elevate more? Because I think having that experience on the interior, there's a lot of value to that continuity on the interior that they built over the last 10 games. Really, Gesky missed the Purdue game last year with an injury. So just to see them build on that, and how much can Gesky elevate? Because physically he's impressive, and he's going to move some people in the run game that they want to get going a little bit more. So what's his next step?
Yeah, no, I think he's really intriguing because he should only get better. Speaking of the offensive line, I want to stick there. I do think Kevin Wigginson's one of the more interesting guys, just because when they got him as a guy who started 6 games at Michigan State last year, we're kind of thinking, this is the 5th guy, 6th guy on the offensive line. I don't think he's in the top 8 right now, which says something about the Illini's improving depth. I think that's a very positive there, but I think his adjustment strength-wise, like just watching him yesterday, just didn't have a solid anchor. Dennis Briggs owned him on a few snaps, just kind of bull rushing him. I do think he's a guy who can go in and be serviceable, but just not maybe he's playing a big of a role as we thought, at least immediately. I do think he's good for depth and could play some center. We'll see if he does that. But TJ McMillan was the second string guy behind Josh Kreutz yesterday. But Brandon Henderson, for me, is still one of the most intriguing offensive linemen. And what we got to see last night is kind of what we thought he would be. He played left tackle. He played left guard. He played right tackle. We think he can play right guard as well. I think there's
he did on one series too. Yeah, okay. He's all for.
Yeah. So he's a guy that I think is the 6th guy. Like we saw yesterday, J.C. Davis came out for a snap. They looked at his ankle. He was fine. But Mountis Muller came in. But then there are other times where Brandon Henderson would play left tackle, or he'd go in at right tackle for Melvin Priestley. So I think he's that swing guy, both at tackle and guard. We'll see if Hunter Whitenack can be the backup right tackle, and he would be the second option. But I think Brandon Henderson could be a backup at almost most of these positions. So at some point, you're going to have an injury likely on the offensive line. I think Brandon Henderson's that next guy up. And the talent is there, man. Size, athleticism, power, mobility. I still think he can get a little bit quicker off the snap, and he's still a little bit raw, but he's going to be a starter next year. No question for me, probably at one of those tackle spots. And he's going to play a role on this team and make an impact.
Yeah, look, if they don't get J.C. Davis, we might be talking about him as a left tackle right now. I mean, that was kind of an idea thrown around last season is, okay, Pearl's gone. What happens? Could Brandon Henderson go in there and be the left tackle? Obviously, you go get a guy who's probably going to be a draft pick in a year with J.C. Davis. And that's similar to what we talked about with Malik Elzy and Zakari Franklin. You let that progression happen a little bit more, but I've said it before. I truly believe he's the backup at 4 spots on the offensive line. Maybe at one of the guards you would put in, is it a Schuster? Is it a Whitenack? but I think Henderson's a guy who's going to be in that conversation, and he'll be a starter a year from now. I don't have any doubts about that. We got to go to the secondary, don't we, Jeremy?
I got a few names in the secondary, yeah.
Yeah, can we just I know we're not supposed to do the stars, right? But Matthew Bailey's interesting as hell to me because, what difference does he make back there? Seeing him in person, he looks exactly the part. He's big, he's long, he's stronger than heck. He's cut up. He looks like a starting safety in the Big Ten and a guy who looks like he could play at the next level. But you got to keep him out there, which is huge. And his communication, you heard him barking a lot last night. He was a guy whose voice really, really rang out in the secondary. And frankly, I think Bielema wanted more communication from his team at a lot of times last night. And Matthew Bailey was the guy who did that. There's a lot of expectations on him. There is. And there were last year. And he's got to be on the field to do that. And I think if he is, he's going to live up to those expectations. But in the same way this defense is betting big on Alex Bray or Dennis Briggs, they're betting big on Matthew Bailey to be that playmaker, that guy at that position is that position getting as many interceptions as the free safety spot that we saw Kirby Joseph and Kendall Smith reel out a ton? Not usually, but Sidney Brown was a pretty good playmaker. If you look at what he did that 2022 year, he made a lot of plays and forced turnovers and had interceptions like that. And I think sometimes when we think about this defense, we think interceptions, free safety, because that's what they do. But that spot at its peak in this defense creates a lot of problems, and they create a lot of turnovers, and they have a huge impact. And that's what Illinois is needing and looking for Matthew Bailey to be. And he's still only a redshirt sophomore, right? Yeah.
Yep.
That's right. Yeah. So you're still looking for a lot out of him, but I think if he's on the field, he is that guy for Illinois.
I thought they missed Sidney Brown as much as they missed anybody last year, just to have that playmaker in the middle of the defense, because he makes an impact both in the run game and the passing game. I mean, 6 interceptions for Sidney the other year. A lot of those came late in the year. That Northwestern game was insane, but I just think they missed that dude at that position. I think it's a really important position that maybe we overlook a little bit. I thought Zakari Harper had some moments, just wasn't as consistent. Clayton Bush, I thought, gave you his all, and I thought he had some really good games, but I thought those guys were overmatched at times. Matt Bailey's what they look like. That's 6'2", 210 pounds, something like that. And we know he can cover from what he did his freshman year. If you just put that Penn State film on and you just see his impact on the run game early, I mean, that was a 7-0 game, midway through the second quarter, and then Matt Bailey leaves, and it just completely kind of changed. Obviously, the interceptions had something to do with that, but I think he's massive. And along those lines, the one concern I have is he's had a foot injury and a shoulder injury, right? And a lot of times when you injure one of those things, it's easier to injure that again. So you got to have him stay healthy. Can he do that? And if he doesn't, who do you have behind him? And that's why my next guy is Demetrius Hill. He's a freshman All-American, one of the top transfers they added a year ago, one of the most high-profile guys they added, even though he's from Florida International. But he shows up, Joey. He looks the part. I don't have his measurements in front of me, but he's 6'2", 200-something pounds, really good athlete, can be versatile and play both free safety and strong safety. But him and Sabor Kareem seem to be battling for that backup strong safety spot. I do want to mention that Miles Scott plays some strong safety as well. Him and Matthew Bailey can both play that. Matt Krasetich can come in and play free safety. Miles Scott can play strong safety. But I think depth at safety is really important. And I don't know what he would have been last year, but that's why he's so interesting to me. Is I do think Demetrius Hill would have played at some point, just because physically he was more impressive than Zakari Harper and more impressive than Clayton Bush. So just what is he and what can he be is intriguing after suffering a torn ACL in the first game last year, because we know he's been productive at the FBS level. Can he do it at Illinois if Matthew Bailey were to go down? So he's kind of just a wild card that, it's fun to kind of get an eye on him and see what he is, because, boy, he looks the part. We haven't really seen him play football much at Illinois, but he looks the part. He looks like Matthew Bailey's size and kind of athleticism.
Yeah, I wish we had seen more of him last year, obviously, to see, because I think with Bailey going down, he's a guy who could have really made things interesting had he been healthy and been able to show what he can do out there. I when he got here, I don't know about you, my brain, when I always right, I think of long range. I thought free safety. And I think going into last season's fall camp, had he not been hurt, it would have been Like in my mind, it would have been, is it Miles Scott or is it Demetrius Hill? And it turns out he's at the other safety spot, though I would imagine there's some level of versatility there. And then obviously Matt Krasedic comes along and it kind of solidifies that backup free safety starting dime safety role. But yeah, Demetrius Hill looks it. Like he walked by yesterday and I looked at you and we said, oh, yeah, he got the measurables that you would like to see out of a Big Ten safety. So interesting guy. Like I just don't know how that fits with him, and I'm curious to find out. I'll say defensively because I think there's a lot of intrigue defensively, Jeremy. James Kruse.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's been some real – Brett Bielema has not been shy about building the buzz for James Kruse. We saw him with that second team group. He was in a green jersey, so it wasn't – and they didn't really hit anyway. Didn't matter.
Yeah, he had a chest injury, pec injury during the spring.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what they were doing. He could have been out there for the whole part of it, given what they did yesterday. But he's a guy who I think is going to find himself in a lot more snaps maybe than we thought, because he can kind of play. If they want to go two linebackers, he could play alongside Rosiak. If you don't want to have Odeluga out there or Daniel Brown out there, I just think there's some versatility, there's some feistiness, there's some fire with him. It's clearly impressive. He's super, super long. I think he's like a +7. I want to say in terms of arm span, he's strong. He looks good. He's strong. I think there's a role for him. And remember, Tariq Barnes didn't play a ton of snaps as the season really went on last year, but you've got to replace those snaps somewhere, right? And I think James Kruse is the guy to walk in there and who could replace those snaps. And I don't know how fast he is in terms of comparatively to Rosiak, but teams attacked Illinois' speed at linebacker last year at times. And is James Kruse an answer to that? Could he be a guy who can go in there and help that out a little? I don't know that it would be an incredibly meaningful difference, but does he have any more speed that could help out some of those problems teams attacked?
All right, I'm going to go back to the secondary. Another guy that looks the part, Caleb Patterson. And you and I both kind of looked at each other when the first defense came out, and it was Caleb Patterson along with Xavier Scott. Now, Terrence Brooks was in the second group. As we said earlier, Zakari, Terrence, some of these newcomers, early on, they're kind of in the second group as they kind of learn what Illinois does, and then they rise. It's pretty typical in training camp. You got to kind of earn your spot. But later on, Terrence Brooks was in the first string. But it looks like Caleb Patterson might be the third corner right now. And he, again, is just one of those guys that, like, when they recruited him, I was really high on what he could become. He just wasn't ready to be what Illinois probably needed him to be last year, which was step in, play right away, and play a big role. But 6'1", 190, he's incredibly long. Tank Wright told me he was the fastest DB that they had. And at that size, man, that's really intriguing. So he got to play some special teams last year, got thrown in the fire against Iowa, and it didn't work out with his penalty and all that. But, like, he's a really talented player, and now he's been here for a year plus. And he seems to be battling for that maybe top backup spot behind Xavier Scott and Terrence Brooks. And maybe if he's impressive enough, he can start and Xavier Scott goes into nickel and Tyler Strain's a backup, right? Or something like that. But at some point, you're probably going to have an injury at corner. And I think Caleb Patterson, Jaheim Clark, and maybe Torrey Cox seem to be battling for that positioning in the cornerback spot. So just another guy that at some point, due to injury, could make a big impact, or if they just want to give Terrence Brooks or Xavier Scott a rest, he could come in for a series, and that's a really important time because teams are probably going to attack the guy who comes in. So Caleb Patterson, with the talent there, with the profile being a top 50 JUCO kid a couple years ago, and just a sophomore still, so he's got 3 years ahead of him. It's really intriguing that he could be one of the top backup options at corner.
I think if you have anyone else in secondary, you might.
I do not.
Good. So are you going to hate me if I cheat and just say the layout of the secondary intrigues the heck out of me?
Sure.
Since we've mentioned all the names, right? But, like, does Xavier Scott stay outside? Does he go inside? If as you mentioned, a Caleb Patterson pushes and is one of the best 5 defensive backs that you have, or the best 3 cornerbacks that you have, I like the versatility of Xavier Scott to kick in there. Terrence Brooks is set. Like, that does not intrigue me. Terrence Brooks, cornerback 1, put him on the outside. Call him in 12 weeks, like, let him do his thing. But then where does Torrey Cox fit in? Where does Chase Canada, another guy, fit in? Is he a nickel? Is he an outside? Is he both? Like, just how they sort out those corners and what that looks like. And I would imagine what it looks like against Eastern Illinois, maybe isn't what it looks like against Purdue or later in that season as you get into kind of the heart of October. Does it change at all? I just think there's options there, and like some of them aren't proven options at the Power 5 level. We have to acknowledge that, but I'm curious how much moving and tinkering. Do they move and tinker with anything at safety? Can, as you mentioned, are there packages where Miles Scott and Matthew Bailey flip around? I don't know. I'm intrigued by how all of that settles itself this month and then in 3 months.
And you just think, again, like the spring additions here, how big of an impact it made to add Zakari to your wide receiver room and just kind of knock everyone else down a spot and make them compete for that role and have less pressure, but to add Terrence Brooks. So instead of Caleb Patterson definitely being the starter, or Jaheim Clark definitely be the starter, those guys are battling for the top backup spot, or Chase Canada, battling for a starting spot. Like that guy's battling for the second string. I just think those additions were so massive. It doesn't mean those guys aren't going to play because injuries obviously can happen, but that's why those additions were so big during the spring. But yeah, there's a lot to sort out back there, but you feel a lot better when you added Terrence Brooks, Torrey Cox, and Matthew Bailey being back. Just need health out of that group moving forward. I'm going to do one more on defense, and I don't know which guy I should pick, but it's really outside linebacker depth. We know who the top three are: Seth Coleman, Gabe Akis, Alec Bryant. I think Gabe and Alec are similar to each other, strong, physical, maybe not as twitchy, but Daniel Brown will definitely be in that rotation. He seemed like he was a little limited yesterday in practice. Haven't heard anything on that, but really good speed rusher. I think he's going to be that fourth guy. But then Joe Barna is a really important piece, is a true freshman who enrolled early, looks like Gabe Akis physically. But if there's an injury, he's in the two deep and might get some snaps. And it's worth mentioning, we saw JoJo Hayden moving from linebacker and getting some outside linebacker snaps yesterday in practice. And he reminds me of Daniel Brown. He played off the edge in high school. I think it's a natural position for him. I've always kind of compared him to Kenenna Odeluga, only bigger, because I do think he's more of a natural pass rusher than anything. But he does have that versatility that Daniel Brown has. So just that outside linebacker depth really intrigues me, because after losing Calvin Smith and not getting JoJo Knight in here, I love the outside linebacker room, but it just doesn't have a ton of depth. That's why moving JoJo Hayden did make some sense.
Yeah, I like that move, because he's the guy we thought of, kind of an overhang linebacker anyway. If you could bulk him up and see if he can play on that edge. I'm going to go offensively because I think we've covered the defense. Cole Rusk, how much, like we saw a lot of Henry Boyer last night. I expected to see a lot of Tanner Arkin. I know they're really, really high on him in terms of being a blocker, but where does Cole Rusk, like I know he fits into this mix somewhere, and I think he's going to have an impact. But every year at this time, this is not just a Bielema tenure. It's, man, they're going to hit these tight ends, and these tight ends you're going to take the cake. It was Daniel Barker and Luke Ford. It was Lou Dorsey, right? It was all, like, you can go back over the course of the last 8 years, and there's always been a tight end that was going to kind of break out as a pass catcher and have those big numbers. And this year it's Cole Rusk. Like, we have to acknowledge that it is him if you were going to pick somebody out of that room. But what's that look like? How many snaps does that look like for him? Do they prefer to lean with or to go with your Arkins and Boyers to really pave the way for Fagan, Alafrey, McCray? I don't know. And maximize with those guys more of like some of those drop-off passes, those short, flat routes. I think you're going to see a decent amount of Cole Rusk because he's talented, but how much? Like, it's hard for me to figure out where all of that talent, how much it's utilized in this offense.
I think tight end just in general is a big question. Like, it's really interesting because I would probably rank it as like one of the lowest expectation rooms for me. But there is like an intriguing mix of guys there. That Tanner Arkin is kind of built like it. We've mentioned it before, like an NFL fullback. He's probably a little bit bigger than that, but he's going to be a reliable blocker. But how much does he add in the passing game? Henry Boyer might be on my list here, Joe. I didn't even have him on, but like I even mentioned it to you. Like, I'm so intrigued by what he could be because he's massive. He's 6'7", 250, 260 pounds, and he's got a little bit more quickness and athleticism. He's actually leaned out a little bit, and I heard he caught a touchdown pass the other day. not a guy that's going to make a ton of plays downfield, but just a tough matchup problem because he can box people out. He's got such a big catch radius. I think in the red zone, he can be really good, but losing Tip Ryman is not a small deal in the run game. And I just think Henry Boyer has as much potential as anybody. Got some snaps last year, wasn't reliable enough, was kind of that 12 personnel tight end, and then lost that job to Tanner Arkin later in the year. So now as a redshirt sophomore, do we see Henry Boyer maybe become one of the bigger use tight ends here? Because I don't think there's one guy that's going to get 75% of the snaps like Tip Ryman got last year. I think this is going to be more a rotation, sub packages. Like Cole Russ is going to be in there when they want to go 10 or 11 personnel. It could be split out a little bit. Well, I think Boyer and Arkin are kind of your 12 personnel. Let's get physical and run it down people's throats. So that group's really intriguing. Carson Goad is undersized. I do think he can be a guy that can catch in the seam and in the flat. He's really, skilled, just undersized. That's pretty clear from seeing these guys. So Boyer and Rusk certainly, because I just think there's more upside there than Arkin, but Arkin's reliability is going to get him a big role.
Yeah, what I'm interested to watch with that group as a whole is how you go about not telegraphing what you're going to do with which tight ends you have out there. Like you need Russ to be able to show himself a little more as a blocker, so you're not, when he's out there, you don't just alert defenses that it's going to be a pass. And similar, you need Arkin and Boyer to show that they can catch it, so you don't just telegraph things. I think back to 2021, Pat Bryant, there was another wide receiver that they put out there. We would just look at each other.
Miles Scott?
May have been. I could be right. I was thinking Carlos Sandy. I don't think he was here in 2020.
No, that's right. Carlos Sandy was right. I think, yeah.
So they went out there, and we knew, like, oh, they're going to run here. This is a run. Like, I think there's probably a little bit more versatility in the tight end room where you don't telegraph it quite like that. But that's something I would think. I mean, I'm curious to ask Robbie Disher how mindful of that are you, because there are very distinct skill sets that, like, two of them are really good at this, two of them are really good at that. Like, you've got to blend that somehow. And I'm really interested to see how they do that.
And that to me is why Rusk and Boyer are so interesting, because Tanner Arkin, I do think, is just because he's not that long. I think he's more of a dump off guy. I think Boyer can be a guy that runs runs a drag route and is a matchup issue. He's not going to burn anybody, but Cole Rusk,
he moves better than we think. Like that's been the word on him is, hey, listen, he's big, but he moves better than you think he moves.
Well, Cole Rusk, like, he's a willing blocker. I don't think he's a great blocker, but he's a willing one. So as long as he can be serviceable there and help you run, maybe he's in the 12 personnel with Henry Boyer at some point, but also gives you that, hey, fake to block, but then get out, and he's a problem as a receiver. So I do think that's why those two guys are intriguing, because I think they do make defenses guess a little bit. And that position is what makes you so versatile, right? Is when you have guys who can do both. All right, you got any more? I got like a couple names I would want to answer.
Yeah, I got a couple names. I don't want to stay on the offensive line yet, but I'll come back to that if you don't mention it. But Colin Dixon is so fascinating. He has been since they flipped him from Wisconsin. He was part of that coaching change there that reopened up things. Nelnor did a good job of keeping that relationship with them. He's not the longest guy in the world, but he's strong. Like, he looks fairly stout isn't the word I'm looking for. He's built. Stout indicates, kind of short and too strong.
He's
but
built more like a running back, right? Like, he's a little taller than that, but he's kind of 205 pounds, not 185, 190.
Yeah, and I think that would give him some versatility. And that's what I'm interested to see with him is how do they use him now with kind of your established guys, your Pat Bryants, your Zakari Franklins? Like, how does he kind of fit in to this offense, and where's he fall in that receiver depth chart? That's what I want to know.
Can I give you my take? I think he's most interesting. You probably didn't want it, by the way. He's most interesting to me in 2025.
I ramble. I needed it. Yeah, go. Agreed.
Like, he is Colin Dixon. Like, if they didn't add Zakari Franklin, he would have been one of the top guys on my list, because, like, maybe somebody needs to surprise here for Illinois to have a good receiving core, because, yeah, you need a Malik Ellis and Kanari Wilson, but you probably also need another guy. I think Zakari, that role is what maybe Colin Dixon could be next year. Kind of a guy who's that in-between, versatile, 6'1", 200 pounds, can maybe take a screen pass and break some tackles, but also get over the top of a defense, make a contested catch. He was a really good get. Like we focus on Malik Elsie for a good reason, but Colin Dixon was another great get for George McDonald and the staff to be able to flip him. So yeah, he really, but like, again, adding Zakari makes less pressure on Colin Dixon to be a performer. But I do think he was one of the guys that really emerged this spring and impressed the staff. So to give you that kind of depth in the 2 deep, and he looks to be in the 2 deep, is good. Another guy on offense I want to bring up because he's going to get opportunity. It's Josh McCray. Josh McCray is going to get touches. He's going to be one of the 3 guys. Brett Bielema calls it a 3-headed monster at running back. So while we think Fagan and Lawfrey should be the guys who get the 2 most touches, I do think Josh McCray is going to play a role. We talked about him a lot in the last podcast, Joey, so I don't want to belabor the point, but we just shouldn't overlook him because he's healthy now. He looks lean. Like he looks like he's in the best shape of his life. And obviously health is held him back, but he was productive as a freshman and Brett Bielema still believes in him. So just another name worth mentioning. I got one last guy on the list, but I'll let you hit anybody else.
I'm going to knock out 2 real quick. And one I'm just going to mention very quickly because I think there's a quote really I want to get out there. And we're stay with running back, and it's Aiden Lawfrey. Because we heard he had a very good spring at Barry Lunny, and Thad Ward talked about kind of the light going on and matching the thinking, the football piece with the speed. And he's very, very fast. So I asked Thad Ward, and I'll find a way to get this into a story at some point. I said, how does he carry that over? Like what's important for him to bring that into fall camp? And I won't read the whole thing, but he said, we challenged him to do that. He had a great spring. I mean, unbelievable spring. That guy we saw this spring, I wanted to see it in the fall to take the next step. He's been that from practice 1 to practice 2. We expect him to be that guy all the way through fall. He's been dynamic as well. It's what we brought him here for, to be that guy. Home run speed. He's electric. He can catch the ball. And then I'll skip a little bit. He's a different guy. I've got to be honest. He's a different guy. Like they are, as we're talking about betting on whatever positions, sounds like they're betting on Aiden Lawfrey to take that step as a 3rd-year guy, to blend that speed with his understanding of the offense, with his comfort in being college football. And that speed, outside of Khalil Valentine, who is thin and probably not someone that I would expect to see a lot of snaps this year. I just think there's a natural progression there for him. That speed doesn't exist in the running back room. Like he's unique in that sense, that home run speed, that electric speed. So can he put that together? Because that's what we've talked about with him since his freshman year. Hey, no one else has that speed. It's time. And freshman year didn't really manifest, and injuries have kind of cropped up here or there. He showed, I thought, the best burst that we've seen from him against Northwestern last year when he was one of the only healthy guys. Like, can you parlay that? Can you keep stacking? Because we talked about him a lot for a lot of years. Now it's time that, hey, he's old. He's older now. He's ready to go and be that guy.
It's amazing. We're talking about this for a lot of years now. He's a redshirt sophomore, right? And this is
Right,
kind of like what you would
we thought
imagine.
he was talented as a freshman to come in and find his way into snaps. You're right. I mean, he's not that old by all standards, but we have kind of thrown around his name the last 2 off seasons at this time.
Well, you thought with Chase Brown gone, could this be the guy who kind of steps into that guy who runs an outside zone, that stretch runs that Chase Brown did well? And boy, he looked good in the spring game. He looked really good in the spring game. He's a good receiver as well out of the backfield. And again, like Fagan, he's one of the most talented players on that offense. Like he was a big recruiting win over Iowa. So I just think, yeah, Aiden Lawfrey, he's just a guy that's going to make a big impact on this team. And it's time. It is time. Staying healthy is really important for him. I got to throw a quarterback out there. I'm going to throw one that you wouldn't have thought I'd throw out there. Cal Swanson. It's a big year ahead for him, Joey. It's kind of my point. And Kirkland Michau, the walk-on, is kind of the 3rd quarterback right now, we would imagine, just because he knows the system. He's been here for 3 years along with Donovan Leary. So we know the top 2 quarterbacks. But Cal is going to get more snaps this year and in training camp. And I think these are really important for him to grow as a quarterback. And I've watched them a little bit. He does look a little bit more accurate. Like I have big questions about him, accuracy as a quarterback. But he's got Trey Petty behind him, and he's got Carson Boyd coming in next year. I think it's a big time for him to take a step forward, make the most out of his snaps. He is a phenomenal athlete. I just have questions about his accuracy, his footwork, and some of the mechanics of it. But he's now had a year to work with Art Sikowski and Barry Lunny Jr. So I'm just intrigued to see if he can make the most out of this training camp and all the reps, because this might be his best opportunity to, like, a preseason guy, like a guy who's Brett Rippon, right? Like, you got to make the most of those snaps in this preseason game because you need more snaps the next preseason game. so that next year you can stay on the roster kind of thing. Like that's what I'm thinking of with Cal Swanson. So I'm just intrigued to hear and maybe see a little bit of how much he improves because he's got a lot of competition knocking on that door next year.
Yeah, and don't forget Joshon Newton's coming in to begin his career
That's
as
right.
a quarterback. And yeah, I'm with you. It's if you're a quarterback and if you're a Big Ten quarterback, this is your opportunity to really, really prove that. And Kirkland Michaud's a junior. Obviously, Luke Altmaier's, Donovan Larry, like not a lot of it's quarterback thing, right? But right now, there's not a lot of upward movement. It wouldn't look like right now, just given how much eligibility those guys in front of him have. So can you make a name, kind of make an impact, and be that guy who could be in that conversation moving forward? I'm going to close. I feel like I've cheated. I feel like I've named a lot of starters, but I don't care. Like I am intrigued by a lot of the starters, and also outside of like Brandon Henderson, reserve wise on the offensive line. You mentioned Mountis Moeller. What's he look like? Is Des Schuster a guy? Hunter Whitenack. But they need Melvin Priestley to be that answer at right tackle because since Alex Palczewski went to the NFL, they have not, which was 1 year, they have not had an answer. They didn't have an answer at right tackle last year. They tried to piece it together. They tried to put, Zy Chrysler, and I don't put all that on Zy Chrysler. I don't think he should have been out there. If he didn't get as many reps in training camp as he should have, that wasn't, to me, the right solution. It didn't play out to be. But you brought in Melvin Priestley. You've kind of gassed him up this offseason. He's earned that the way it sounds like he's played. He's physical. He's strong. He can move pretty well. If you can solve that riddle at right tackle, I love where everything else is on the offensive line. J.C. Davis, it's been very clear how high up we are on him. I like the returning interior part of the offensive line. If you can solve that, I think collectively there's a lot of sighs of relief in terms of the fan base, in terms of, I don't want to say inside the Smith Center because I don't know, but if you can coach the penalties out of him, there's a lot there. His PFF grades were good short of the penalties a year ago. And those are a big deal. I don't want to minimize that. But everything else, like his pass blocking was better than you would think for a guy with all those. His run blocking, he's powerful. If Bart Miller can coach that out, you've got an answer there. And that's good news for Illinois.
And look, I want to be honest with you, like, this was kind of an under the radar transfer edition. Like after they added Wigginton and JC Davis, like, oh, they're adding another guy. All right, well, maybe depth, maybe he can play guard or tackle. And then he's the starting right tackle in the spring game. It's like, oh, okay, well, maybe this is to put a fire under the belly of Brandon Henderson. And then I watched him play in that spring game. And then yesterday I got another good look at him. He's impressive. Like he's a really good athlete, incredibly powerful. And from everything I hear, he's got a nasty streak. So he's not the longest right tackle, but I think he's going to be great in the run game. He has a lot of experience in the passing game. He does have to clean those things up in the penalty wise. So, but I've been really impressed with him. The coaches call it transitioning burst to power or speed to power, and he does it. Like he can really move people up front. So he's probably the surprise for me of the transfer class so far. And if they got a right tackle for the next 2 years and adding a kid from Grambling State via East St. Louis, like that's a big addition that can pay huge dividends for them. So yeah, he is really intriguing and he can really move. So I do think he gives you some options of stretch runs of just things you probably couldn't do with Zy Chrysler there last year. And Isaiah Adams isn't as good of an athlete as Melvin Priestley. Melvin Priestley is a really, really impressive athlete, one of the best on that offensive line. So, yeah, he is intriguing because he's going to make a huge impact on this team.
Yeah, in terms of transfer additions, this isn't like position to position, but I would have thought we'd be talking like kind of reverse in terms of place on the depth chart with Kevin Wigginton and Melvin Priestley when they added those two. And obviously, Priestley emerging at right tackle, I don't know, that's something Wigginton is built for to play tackle. I'm sure it isn't.
But we would have thought like maybe Geske and Henderson
could move out because they flirted with Geske and Henderson attack. Henderson certainly is a tackle, and Geske had that opportunity last spring. So yeah, you're right. Like they could have made that work.
Yeah. All right. The last guy I would put out here is David Alano, which is the guy we get to see most do his job during the training camp sessions that we get to see. He's been awesome. Like, I think I've seen him miss once in the 3 practices we have seen, and he hit a 52-yarder yesterday and was perfect. We keep hearing Brett Bielema going, perfect day. So he is that's probably as much insight as we have as on the kickers. And David Alano has been really, really freaking good. And it's a huge story. Like special teams is a huge story for this season as you're replacing your kicker who made 2-game winners last year, right? And you're replacing you need David Alano to take a step forward as a kickoff guy, or Ethan Moczulski to be better in that end. And obviously you need to stop fumbling punt returns, which will be interesting to see if Hank Beatty can secure that job or somebody else steps up there.
Hey, notably not mentioned, if we're staying with specialists, Hugh Robertson. He caught a lot of justified criticism in 2022 for his inconsistencies. He's really leveled out. He is a fine Big Ten punter. And it was rough in 2022, but I just think we got to point out, like, that is not a position of concern for me right now is Hugh Robertson, which is credit to him, because I'm sure that 2022, and he acknowledged it, like, sure, that wasn't an easy season. Just the way that he played and some really critical mistakes and big moments.
All right, that's all I got. That was a good list. Who surprised you most on my list? Cal Swanson?
Cal Swanson was easily the answer. I took every starter, so I'm not going to ask you the same.
I was good, though. It was a good exercise. I get to talk a little bit more about training camp. Thank you for listening to the Illini Inquirer podcast. Give us a follow, rating, review.
Hold on. I was going to ask you this the other day. I cut you off. You're going to have to repeat your end of the thing there.
Yeah, go for it.
We did have a little bit of an open practice yet. Not a little bit. We had 2 hours there yesterday. And I'm thinking back to before 2022. Remember, Sidney Brown had a concussion and we showed up and it's like, wait a minute. That's Matthew Bailey. And someone, kind of around said, I guess the secret's out with him, huh? Pick one secret's out guy right now that if we showed up to an open practice in 2 weeks, who would be the secret's out guy?
Oh, see, I have a vibe about a freshman, but he's just blocked. I'm so intrigued, and I didn't mention him here because I don't think he's going to be in the mix. Tanner Heckel intrigues the hell out of me. He was like a third-string free safety.
Bold to take the under-recruited safety with Brett Bielema and Aaron Henry. Very bold of you.
But yeah, I mean, that's the thing about the transfer additions they made. There's like not that like definite freshman. I'm like, oh my God, this is a huge shock to me. Like would Angelo McCollum be able to figure his way out in the rotation, something like that? JoJo Hayden at outside linebacker was kind of that yesterday for me. But Tanner Heckel is a guy I got an eye on just because his athleticism, won state in like 3 different events in Kansas and is just a freak athletically, both explosively. He's just undersized at this point. He needs to gain a lot of strength. But again, at that playmaking position, he's got like the Kirby Joseph athletic traits. So maybe it's a year from now, 2 years from now, but he intrigues the hell out of me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would throw in just, and again, similar. I think he's blocked. I think there's a lot in front of him. But if we showed up in 2 weeks and Jeremiah Warren had put together a couple good weeks of fall camp, he would be a guy who I would have on that list. But less secrets out guys as depth starts to emerge in this, and portal additions are really no doubt starters or no doubt 2 deep guys. I was just curious who you might have. And honestly, taking a playmaking safety with these guys is a pretty good bet.
And it's one of the positions that seems easiest to transition to as a freshman. And they've shown that with Matthew Bailey, Matt Krasevich, obviously the last couple of years. All right. Is that it?
Yeah. Now do your closing thing now.
All right. Thank you for listening to the Illini Inquirer podcast. Give us a follow, rating, review, wherever you get your podcast. Check us out on YouTube as well. Hello, YouTube. Hit that like button, subscribe to us, and hit the notifications bell as well. For Joey Wagner, I'm Jeremy Werner. Everybody have a great day. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you next time on the Illini Inquirer podcast.